is some of the most informed people in the country, people who actually knew what they were talking about, who were speaking factually about the most important issues of the day, were pulled off social media and the tech platforms, Google, Facebook, Twitter. Not because they were wrong or speaking misinformation, but because they were saying things that challenged the Democratic Party's storyline, which is inherently false. So at that point, we thought we should have these conversations in a place that big tech can't touch, and Fox Nation is that place. So we had an amazing conversation with a man called Dr. Scott Atlas from Stanford University. Scott Atlas knows more about how this country has tackled the coronavirus pandemic than maybe any living American. He was on the White House Coronavirus Task Force in the previous administration. For saying things out loud that are true, that he has firsthand knowledge of, he's been censored. But again, he won't be censored here. As a member of that task force, Scott Atlas saw firsthand the people who were formulating our COVID policy, and he was shocked by it. Here's part of our conversation.
In mid-August, I went to the task force meeting. And of course, it's the people who you know, and you're sitting around the room. And the vice president ran the whole task force. Dr. Birx is the task force coordinator. She ran the medical side. And I'm listening to these people talking, and I was stunned. I was stunned at the lack of knowledge, at the complete lack of knowing the data, at the lack of critical thinking. And so there's a discussion, and
was Fauci in these meetings?
Yep, Fauci, Birx, Redfield, a lot of people who were heads of agencies, Seema Verma, CMS. I mean, she's not medical. Dr. Giroir was there, but the three, what I call sort of the troika of the task force, was Dr. Redfield, head of the CDC, Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Birx, who was the head of it, the task force coordinator. And I would listen to them, and their discussions were, were off base. And so my first meeting, the vice president turns to me and said, well, does everyone agree? And I'm sort of reluctant to speak up. And he sees my face and he says, well, Scott, you're here for a reason. I asked you to come here to say your opinion. If you disagree, say it. And I said, okay, I totally disagree. And then I went through the data. And in fact, I was the only one who had scientific papers in the task force meeting. I walked around the White House my entire time, and every task force meeting I went to, with 12 papers, all the new data. And I would go through the scientific papers whenever I spoke. And whenever I spoke about an issue, whether it was schools opening, the risk to children, the immunity, no one there, none of these medical people offered any data to rebut it. None of them, not one. They never had any scientific paper to rebut it. They would just say, I'm an outlier. Okay? They would say...
So they would go after you personally?
It was all personally. They were a unit. Birx, Fauci, and Redfield. In fact, Dr. Birx said in, say, January, February of this year that, I didn't know this at the time, she had an unwritten sort of contract agreement with Fauci and Redfield that if one of them got fired, they would all fire. They were in it together, and their history stems from HIV and AIDS. And I briefly mentioned this in the book. They worked together on AIDS. They worked together with one focus, by the way, to get a vaccine, which should ring a bell with what's happening. They were sort of a group of people. When you're in the government for 40 years in high positions, like Dr. Fauci, the people that are in government successfully are not there because they're neutral and therefore they can exist in different administrations. They're there because they understand how to navigate the politics. They understand how to make friends in various agencies. Okay, this is a very political position when you're a 40-year government bureaucrat. So I thought Dr. Fauci, from what I had, I think he's a smart guy. He knew the material from the emails that he wrote to his friends from February, March. But what was said during the meetings was revealed by not just Dr. Fauci, by all the medical people in the task force, a lack of knowledge about the data. They never cited a scientific study. They never knew a critical assessment. They never gave a refutation of any study, nor a refutation or disagreement of each other. Never, not once. I mean, that's unheard of in science. There is no science without disagreement.
Well, I was going to say, that's not science.
There's no such thing. And so, I'll give you an example. as a person who looks at science and papers, I was a scientific paper reviewer and an NIH grant reviewer for many, many years. You look at the methods section of a paper in a journal, meaning the materials and methods. How did you do the study design? If you see that's not good, that's not appropriate, you're done. It doesn't matter. You can't make a conclusion if the study was done incorrectly. Right. Okay, so I evaluate the papers. I don't sit there and read the blurb of the paper in the New York Times. I look at the paper. I was talking almost every single day to some of the world's best epidemiologists about the data on an ongoing basis. These people, there was never any indication that they knew the paper, cited a paper, or even criticized the paper, not one. And as I say in the book, I mean, there were medical words being mispronounced in the meetings. There were statements being made that were just, I was looking around and sort of saying, did anyone else hear this but me? I mean, I've never worked with people at this level in my career as I did in that task force, and I'm not saying at a high level. Okay, I'm saying at a low level. I've worked at some of the best medical centers in the country, University of Pennsylvania, University of Chicago. I was a medical student, Stanford University, Mount Sinai, New York. I always would say, I'm not sure these people could have been assistant professors where I worked. I mean, there was a lack of critical thinking, a lack of preparation, no one cited data but me.
You can watch the full hour of our conversation with Dr. Scott Atlas on Fox Nation by going to foxnation.com or drcarlson.com. We've had so many great conversations recently. We don't want to devalue our own currency by claiming every one of them is a must-watch. But that one really was. Bobby Kennedy Jr., too. So the QAnon shaman, the Chewbacca guy, dared to walk around the Capitol in a haze on January 6th. He was the guy in Viking horns. There's been a very troubling development in his case. I'll tell you what it is straight ahead.